I am Charles Raphael, and this is SRL into Practice, a new video series presented by the American Educational Research Association Special Interest Group Studying and Self-Regulated Learning. SRL into Practice is a series of video session conversations between an SSRL SIG leader and members of our professional community who are powerfully transforming SRL principles into practice in diverse educational settings and communities while promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. In this session, Pamela Murphy, an associate professor at the University of Arizona Global Campus, talks with Bradley Berge, an assistant professor at Queens College of the City University of New York, about his recent research publication, The Stereotype Does Not Define Us: The Social Influences and Life Experiences That Led Asian American Men to Pursue a Teaching Career. Please enjoy the conversation.
Welcome to Conversations with Scholars. I'm Pam Murphy, and today we're going to be talking with Bradley Berge, who is an assistant professor at Queens College of City University of New York. His field is educational psychology. Bradley, welcome.
Thank you. So good to be part of this, and good to have a conversation with you, Pamela.
I was really impressed with your research and your qualitative study. I just was absolutely captivated by the title. The Stereotype Does Not Define Us: The Social Influences and Life Experiences That Led Asian American Men to Pursue a Teaching Career. And as you pointed out, even in a city as large and diverse as New York, the majority of teachers and teacher candidates are white and female. So I think it's really important to look at different cultures, ethnicities and cultures of people who want to be teachers. So we can find out more about their motivation and what may be different and what's kind of general. So
absolutely,
yeah, you have 12.
Just to make a connection to the quantitative study, one of the findings that was interesting and kind of led to a closer look through this qualitative work was John Ronalucci and I we did latent profile analysis to try to understand how these fit choice variables kind of clustered together, and then looked at whether those profiles were evenly distributed across different race groups and across gender, et cetera. And one of the interesting findings that came out of that was that Asian American teachers or pre-service teachers were more likely to be in this group that reported high values, but also high costs, or kind of moderate values, but high costs, than were other race groups. And that got us kind of interested in what might be going on there, why in that larger sample, why students with an Asian background might experience greater costs of choosing a teaching career than do white students or do Black or Latino students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found this very interesting that often the parents would actively discourage their sons from going into teaching. They wanted them to be doctors or lawyers or something that makes a lot of money. And yet, perhaps, before they came to this country, in their cultures, teachers were respected and revered. And in certain cultural groups that have been in the United States for a long time, teachers were historically revered. I know in my immediate family, my parents did not have the opportunity to go to college. They had some relatives who did have that opportunity. And the highest thing you could be was a teacher. And if you weren't a teacher, you could work in the post office for African Americans, back in the 1950s. But my parents instilled in me at a young age that I was going to college. They told me I was going to college. And I did. But I remember I was not thinking of a teaching career. I was interested in a lot of different things, and I hadn't made up my mind. But my mother in particular assumed that if I was going to college, I was going to be a teacher. And I did a lot of other things after college before I became a teacher.
Yeah.
It happened eventually. I have always worked at what I love. And I'm interested in a lot of things. I have not gone for a job just for the money. And that's what I see in the interviews you had with the young Asian men who had, fought for the opportunity to be teachers because they wanted to be teachers, not just chase the money. That was interesting.
That was really eye-opening to me. So I, as a white man, and I grew up in a middle-class family, I chose to become a teacher too, as I kind of on my career path to what I currently do. And I was always supported in that decision. Both kind of the people around me, my parents, my teachers, and also the kind of broader community. I felt like teaching was an important, worthwhile profession. I don't know how aware even I was about how well paid or about the status of the profession as I was thinking about it. It just wasn't on my radar. And it was really fascinating to sit with, to interview the participants of the study and learn from them just how different their cultural milieu was growing up and how they saw teaching and the messages they received about teaching. One of the things that comes out in the students' stories is that every single one of these 12 participants referenced the fact that culturally, teaching was not they understood that teaching was not a career they should be aiming for, right? That it's not a preferred career in the United States in their context. Everybody, right? So they all talked about this in one way or the other, that like, hey, there's this kind of broader narrative that, the best and the brightest do not go into teaching. The best and the brightest become doctors and lawyers and engineers and high-paying, high-prestige professions. So the kind of the title, or not the title, but the title references something one of the participants said, which is like the stereotype about being Asian is true, right? That there is this like really strong pressure to perform, to achieve, and that achievement also means like financial success. One thing that was interesting and where there was difference in the group of 12 students is that how parents in particular interacted around that kind of larger cultural narrative about teaching differed. So there were participants whose parents were very much like giving voice to that cultural narrative that like teaching is not for men, it's not for smart people, it's not what you should be striving for. But there were also participants whose parents were more likely to say, you need to figure out what you want to do, right? And if that's teaching, we'll support you. They were kind of a minority within this group, but there was that. So I think the parental perceptions kind of amplified cultural messages, or were the direct source of them, or in some cases they mitigated a little bit the kind of cultural the general discouragement these men were exposed to about choosing a career in teaching.
Yeah, I remember reading that for a small number within your sample, their parents were against them going into teaching at first, but eventually they kind of mellowed on that position. Yeah, that was nice to read.
Yeah,
some of them had a little bit more positive experience with.
They did. One of the things that I became so impressed with about the experiences and the stories of the students is that, so all of them in one way or another needed to kind of push back against that narrative and say, actually, for who I am, for what I want to do, what my values are, this is a path that I want to take. And I was just so impressed with the kind of identity development that needs to happen to be able to do that, versus kind of following in a path that is deemed to be acceptable or being encouraged along that path, versus kind of choosing something that goes against social pressures that students are experiencing. I was just so impressed with that. One of the things that was important for the participants in that identity formation was having experiences with the profession and experiences in other professions. So one of the things that comes out in the results is this idea that there's career exploration that precedes this commitment to a teaching profession. And that exploration took at least two forms. One was having formative teaching experiences. So students had, almost all of these men had some kind of early exposure to teaching. They were tutors, they were coaches, they worked with their siblings or cousins, they worked in an immigration office, helping people study for citizenship tests, all of these kind of quasi-teaching experiences, and it triggered for them an interest in the profession. Oh, this is something that, like, I feel good when I'm doing this. Oh, I'm good at this. I can see myself choosing this path, right? So there's experiences I think were really important in helping students see what their abilities are and what their values are, and that teaching could aligns with that. The other kind of experience that was really important to the students was that they, many of them tried other professions, other majors, before realizing, like, this doesn't have meaning to me, or I'm not good at this, or this isn't for me. So, you know, these students who are pressured to choose STEM careers, pre-med, careers, oftentimes experience early in that kind of academic trajectory, difficulty or lack of enjoyment. And it made them question, okay, wait a second, this is what somebody else wants from me, and I don't enjoy it. It's not for me. It doesn't fit, right? And so that experience seemed to be really, really important and pivotal for students to be able to say, okay, my experience is telling me this, and my experience is highlighting these are my values, and that seemed to be really important in helping develop the identity that would allow students to choose this path, even though it's going against what parents or kind of broader cultural pressures might be saying.
Interesting. So this was your first qualitative study, and you know you're well known among people who read about motivation research for your quantitative work. So how was that transition for you from doing a quantitative study to doing a qualitative study?
It was definitely a learning experience. So I had a little bit of qualitative training in my doctoral studies, and worked with some qualitative researchers at the Research Talk group. But never, I generally feel like I've been trained to be a quantitative researcher, and always fancied being a mixed method person and being able to pursue qualitative research if that's where questions led me. But I definitely struggled to do it. Like, so writing up a quantitative analysis comes much easier than writing up a qualitative analysis for me. One of the central challenges, I think, that was salient to me as I was doing this is how challenging it is to reduce qualitative narratives into themes to discuss, right? That listening to these interviews were like hour-and-a-half interviews, typically about kind of the life course of the individual and how they chose teaching and the various, how they viewed the profession and all of this. And it was these rich stories about how these men chose a teaching career. And then to go from, you know, hundreds of pages of transcripts down to a results section that, you know, fits 15 pages, that's really challenging. It was challenging to simplify these like nuanced and rich narratives into kind of a basic idea that groups them all together, right? There, I always felt like I struggled very hard to actually, and through the review process, had to keep whittling to the point where I feel like I've whittled a lot away, but there's still a lot rich here. But that was a central challenge. And I think that's such a different experience than quantitative research, where I'm perfectly happy to look at a mean and a standard deviation and say, yeah, that captures something meaningful about this person's experience. And you don't, you're distant enough from how reduced that already is that you don't have to do the, I don't know if it's emotional work. It felt a little bit emotional at times to kind of like not, to realize that I'm just going to exclude this interesting piece of this person's story and nobody's going to know it because I can't fit it in here, right? So that was a real challenge to simplify what is so complex. I think this will not surprise any qualitative researcher out there. But when you're close to people's stories, they're complex, and our theories simplify things, and they're useful because they simplify things. And we can say, well, we're going to ask these 3 questions or these 6 questions, and that's going to capture this concept and this construct, and we're going to be okay with that. Getting close to the stories, you realize just how complex that construct really is, and the various ways that intersects with people's lived experiences and how it plays out in different cultures and contexts, that that can overwhelm, I think, or it overwhelms me as somebody who's kind of relatively new to qualitative research. And so really trying to just kind of continue to step back and say, okay, what is most central here? What is most shared? And then how do I integrate the color and the richness that's there also without kind of creating a really highly entangled narrative? So it felt like a very circuitous analytic path. And I don't know if that's because that's the nature of qualitative research, or if it's because that's the nature of qualitative research when you're a newbie doing it. But it felt very much like that. And so that was a central challenge. I'll say one other thing is that I really enjoyed being close to students' stories. That the experience of listening to somebody's narrative as they're giving it to you and being able to ask follow-up questions in the interviews and to be able to kind of understand all of the context that goes into a life choice of why you choose to become a teacher is fascinating. It's wonderful to listen to people's stories, and completing the fit choice battery, the fit choice questionnaire is also a way of kind of telling a story, but it's a very different way of capturing a story. And it was really nice to be close to students' actual experiences. I felt like I learned a lot about, you know, the students that I serve kind of broadly in this institution. It was just really eye-opening for me, and I really appreciate that the qualitative research got me to do that.
Right. Do you think you'll be doing more of that kind of thing in the future? Perhaps with the different groups that were represented in your large study?
Yeah, I hope to. I definitely hope to. I need to get more efficient at it. But this focus on Asian American students was part of we conducted interviews with Black students and Latino students. And so I would like to do something similar to these other, with these other groups. This was a starting point in part because it was the largest of the largest sample that I had. And also as I was looking at the literature, there's I think been a growing interest in diversifying the teaching workforce. And a lot of attention has been paid, and rightly so, to Black teachers and Black male teachers, and maybe to a lesser extent, Latino teachers. And I feel like there has not been that much work, or at least I'm not aware of it through this project, of Asian American teachers. And I think Asian American teachers will continue to be a growing part of the workforce, and hopefully will be. And I think there's a need to understand how their cultural contexts and racial experiences figure into to their career decision as well.
So what do you have in the pipeline for research now? I presume you have something in process?
Yeah, with this project in particular, I have a little internal grant within CUNY to conduct interviews with male pre-service teachers of color. And I'm particularly interested in diving deeper into this idea of the socialization that men of color experience relative to the profession, and how they choose the profession in light of that social context. And so that will be like a mixed method study where they're surveying teachers or pre-service teachers in terms of other career choice. But trying to understand that kind of antecedent that's in, if we look at like the fit choice model, the social antecedents of like career encouragement, career discouragement, early teaching experiences, to try to understand how the experiences of men of color in their, as students and as they're kind of in adolescence, how the messages that they're having about teaching and how they're making a career choice in light of those. It's telling to me that, so I'm a big fan of the fit choice, and it's a really solid instrument. One of the measures though, one item didn't work very well in this context, which is, so if we're measuring career interest value, it's like, I like teaching, I enjoy teaching, and I'll have the exact words in front of me. And one is, I've always wanted to be a teacher. And this, I've always wanted to be a teacher, didn't load with the other items. And I think that it might be because in this context, that the attraction to teaching career happens later. Similar to what came out in these interviews, where it's kind of after there's been exposure to teaching experiences and exploration of other career paths, that a student says, oh, this is actually a possibility for me and might be a good fit for me. So I'm really interested in trying to understand the exploration that happens that leads into this profession. And, longer term, one application of that would be to try to understand how we can cultivate experiences for our students earlier in their education that allows them to experience what teaching is like and what it involves, and that this might be one thing they can do to do something meaningful in the world. And so that's kind of longer term, but the shorter term project will be to try to understand those antecedents a little bit better.
Well, I look forward to seeing your results.
Thank you.
The qualitative study you recently published, that was, the participants for that study were recruited from a larger quantitative study, which was about motivation profiles. And I was interested in, you had 630 participants in the quantitative study, and 12 of those met the criteria for your qualitative study. They were Asian American male pre-service teachers. But just out of curiosity about the quantitative study, do you feel that the results of this are generalizable to all teachers in the US? Because teachers in the US were mentioned, but I got the impression that maybe all of the sample came from one place. Is that correct?
Yeah, it definitely did. So the larger study was conducted in New York City. Most of the participants were drawn from the City University of New York system. So it's the data is regional for sure. And I think the findings of both of the studies, specifically the quantitative study, need to be viewed as in that context. That these are students who are growing up for the most part in New York City public schools, have chosen to become teachers, and it's looking at how they perceive the profession, the values that they see in teaching, but also the costs that they associate with the profession of teaching, and their socialization experiences in terms of encouragement or discouragement for teaching. All of that's taking place in a particular social cultural context. And so I think this could look different if it was being done in LA or in rural Indiana, in terms of not just the experiences that are informing the participants' perceptions, but the context that it's all playing out in. So I'm always wary that kind of anything we do in one study can be generalized unproblematically, really broadly. I think it does. A lot of the quantitative study was using Watt and Richardson, Helen Watt and Paul Richardson's fit choice model, which I think has been really very helpful to the field of trying to look at teacher career motivations. And it's been very useful to be used kind of in various cultural contexts that allow then some comparison and trying to understand what's similar and different in these cultural contexts. And there hasn't been so much work done in the US yet with the fit choice, and then even less so done on urban students. And so I think we just need to continue to try to understand these patterns across lots of contexts before we can feel any kind of confidence that we can make generalizations.
Do you think you would, in the future, perhaps look for a broader sample, or do you think this would come from other researchers who are located elsewhere?
I would love to look at it in a larger sample or in other contexts. It was done here because I'm here and my colleague was here, John Ronalucci, who's the author on the quantitative paper, a co-author, and we had access to students at CUNY. And actually my interest in, more broadly, my interest in teacher career motivation is in part because of the opportunities that are available to me at this institution. So I was trained as a motivational researcher and in self-regulated learning. And then as I came into Queens, I thought I became aware actually of a regional and also a national problem of trying to recruit a diverse teaching workforce. Even in a place like New York City, which is incredibly racially and ethnically diverse, the teaching workforce in the city, which I think is the largest public school system, is still predominantly white, predominantly female. And there's been some initiatives in the city to diversify that workforce, and in particular to recruit men of color to teaching. And so as I came into this position, I saw a connection between my interest in motivation and expectancy value theory, which I had been working with, and the fit choice instrument that had come out, and this problem that was actually very relevant to the institution I was in. And so I kind of chose to move in this direction, in part because of the opportunities that were like immediately available to me here. So getting back to your question, I mean, I think one thing collecting big samples is really time consuming, resource intensive, especially if you're trying to do it across multiple sites and in a representative way. And so if I ever have the opportunity to do that, absolutely. If there are national data sets that collect the kinds of perceptions that I'm interested, I'd be very interested in looking at them. But yeah, it was local because it was convenient in part.
Okay. Yeah, NCES has some large data sets, but I'm not sure if they would contain all the variables that you would need. That would be great if they did.
It would.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
No, it's been a pleasure to talk with you, Pamela. We've kind of seen each other at conferences and said hi here and there, but it's been great to share a little bit more about my experience doing this work, and very appreciative to the SSRL SIG and for all it does in kind of keeping conversations happening between conferences. I think your work and so many other people that you work with who are doing that is really important. So I appreciate all your work to keep the community robust. So thank you.
Thank you.